What's up guys, Ryan here at Signature Edits, and inside of this Lightroom tutorial we're taking a look at better skin tones inside of Lightroom. So we're going to talk about the best possible techniques for improving the skin tones in your photos, whether you're on Lightroom Classic or Lightroom CC. This video is going to be really helpful because I'm going to show you the best tips and tricks to getting better skin tones in your models and also just editing portraits in general. So without further ado, let's hit that intro and get into it. All right, so inside of this video, you're going to have the chance to actually edit along with me. And that means that if you head to signatureedits.com/free-raw-photos or hit the link in the description below, you can download these raw files for free. Now, these were all uploaded by awesome photographers like yourself. So thank you to anyone whose photos are featured in here. We've got Larson Ryan. We've got a few anonymous photographers. We've got Anna Matalis. So make sure to check them out and thank them and tag them when you actually share your edits online, and tag at Signature Edits Co so I can see what you come up with. So without further ado, go ahead, grab those files, edit along with me, or just watch, it doesn't really matter, and we'll get started together. Now, before we actually dive in, I do want to say, obviously, I've got a variety of skin tones in here, but I don't have every skin tone represented. That doesn't matter. These techniques are going to apply no matter what color skin tone your subjects are working with, okay? So before we get a bunch of angry messages in the comments, it's just what I had available. So that's what I'm working with. Hope that's cool. All right, we're going to head over and start by just looking at all of these photos together. Now, I want you to notice we've got a few different kind of skin tones in general, but we've also got a lot of different coloring. And that's the thing about photography that no one really talks about that often and was super confusing to me when I started out was how do you actually fix a photo which looked really good in camera and then you get it back and you're like, what is going on here? Now, this one might be kind of impossible to fix anyways because we've got ISO 6400. It was taken with a very, very slow shutter speed, and that's why it's all blurry. It's really noisy. But even more than that, if we actually zoom in on our subject, when you take the photo, it might look fine to you. Everything looks good. Everything looks nice. You take it, you get it back into your computer at home, and you realize, oh, the skin tones look really weird. Why is that? Well, it's because your eyes, when you're looking at different subjects, different scenes, different lighting conditions, will adjust over time. So what I mean by that is if you've ever actually gone, you're hanging out in your house at nighttime and you've got all the lights on, and then you go over to the fridge, you open up the fridge door, and all of a sudden everything's blue. It's like this blue light just floods out. Well, during the daytime, you wouldn't notice the fridge light was blue, but at nighttime you do because all of a sudden all of these other lights are warm and yellow and your eyes adjust to that. So it kind of compensates, and then the camera doesn't compensate. So that's why you're confused later on when you get home and you're like, what's wrong with this? So that's really what causes that. And there's a few different fixes. The main is going to always be your white balance. So simply by adjusting our white balance, making things a little bit cooler, a little bit warmer, we're going to be able to dial things in and get a much more pleasing skin tone. So here's initially and here's after. Feels a lot better. Now, how do you know actually what kind of skin tone you're going for or what temperature to set the photo to? Because although this looks better, it still doesn't look great. There's a few different ways to figure this out. The first is to start with a reference photo in your library. So for example, this photo here, I just grabbed and added to the collection because the skin is just beautiful. This is really healthy looking skin. It's nice magenta. It's got some warmth to it. It's not cold. It's not washed out. The texture, the feeling just looks and feels good. So my advice would be when you're starting out, just use this little reference tool inside of Lightroom. Hit this little, come on, let's head over here to our reference view. And what we can do is actually drag this photo over here on the left. And then when we're editing our other photos, we can actually compare to a good example, an example of what we're going for in terms of how the skin should look, what sort of shade we're aiming for. So now we can go over here to our white balance. We can obviously cool this one down quite a bit. We're going to add quite a bit of magenta because things are looking pretty green. And that's much better. So here's before and here's after. So that's kind of my quickest, easiest tip when it comes to actually adjusting and getting better skin tones. Use a reference photo because that will really help and prevent your eyes from adjusting. Because especially if you're editing photos from multiple photos from the same shoot, over time you just get used to looking at those photos and things look good even though you're in reality editing really weird colors. It's because your eyes just get used to it over time. All right, I'm blathering on. Let's just edit together and show you what I mean. Most of the time you're going to be able to just adjust the white balance and get the skin kind of 80% there. So obviously if the subject has a different skin tone than your comparison view, it's going to be a little bit trickier, but it can still be helpful. Just dial things in. So here's before, here's after. Just added some magenta, cooled it down slightly. Now you're going to notice some other problems introduced when you do that in certain photos. So this one obviously is really blue because we're taking this photo maybe around sunset, but the shadows were really blue in terms of coloring. So we can come down here to our HSL, just take some saturation out of the blues and the aquas, maybe add a little bit of luminance to the blues and the aquas, and you cancel that out. Now overall, this image, if we're just going to do a basic edit to it, we'd take our contrast down because it's very, very high. Take the exposure up. I'm going to take our dehaze up a little bit. There you go. So here's before and here's after. Skin looks a lot nicer. So we're going to come back to some other things in a minute, but first let's just go through all these photos and practice together, dialing in our white balance, getting some better skin tones just with the really, really basic tools. And what I kind of like to say is at the end of the day, most of your editing in Lightroom doesn't come down to using really cool tricks and tips and secrets that no one else knows about. It's being able to use the basic tools better than 99% of other people out there because your eyes are just adjusted. Your eyes are used to working with different colors and shades and nuances, and you can pick out details and tune things more closely than someone else. And so it's really about mastering the basic tools more than anything. So here's before, here's after. And that's not a major shift, but when you actually look at the before and after, obviously it's going to make a big difference to our overall photo. So again, we'll just do a little bit of some basic editing. I'll add some texture to sharpen it slightly, a little bit of dehaze, maybe a touch of saturation. Then I'm going to drop the contrast a little bit and raise up our highlights. So before and after. Really basic, really subtle, but the skin is much more healthy looking. So you want to prevent kind of having that green tone to the skin. All right, now this subject, obviously very, very bright. So we're going to start by just taking our exposure down. Zoom in here. And I'm going to take my white balance up a little bit and my magenta up a little bit. And if you don't know which direction to go, kind of just play around, see which feels better as you're going back and forth, and you'll develop that skill as you go. So in some cases, you're going to find like this one, it's both because our subject, her skin has just less color overall than our reference photo, but also white balance doesn't always do everything you need it to. So that's when you go into the next tool, which would probably be our HSL or our camera calibration. So if I come down here to my HSL panel, that's my color panel. I've got it in this view where you just select hue, saturation, or luminance. You can also hit all, and it will show you all of them. And skin is generally found in the oranges, and then a little bit in the reds, a little bit in the yellows. So what we can do is grab our yellows and take that, instead of going towards green, we'll take it towards magenta a little bit, or towards just more of a reddish yellow. And we can do the same thing with our oranges. You're going to see that if your white balance isn't enough, you can dial it in by adjusting the hue just like that. So here's before and here's after. That's maybe a little bit too warm now, so I'm going to take my white balance back down a little bit. So before, after, let's take the exposure up so you can see it more accurately. There we go. Okay, let's go on to our next photo. This one we already tackled a little bit, so you can see once we put it next to our reference photo, things still are very much not right. So first off, let's try by just start out by just fixing this noise reduction issue. We'll add some sharpening to it, take our masking up so we're not sharpening everything, just the main details. Now, if you ever are wondering about the sharpening panel, I do have a video on it, but really quickly, holding down the Alt or Option key on your keyboard is really going to help you because you can dial things in much more quickly. Just holding down Alt, all these kind of secret views pop up, and then you can dial in your photo much more closely. Okay, so we're only going to sharpen the very big lines. Okay, so here's before and here's after. So slight improvement. Still not great, but enough for us to match our skin tones now. So we tried the white balance, and that's kind of as far as we could get it. Here's before and here's after. So it is better. However, we can do more. So the next step would be to go to our HSL. So we're going to grab our oranges, take those towards magenta a little bit. And then there's two options when it comes to adding color and kind of adding more depth to the skin. First is to raise the luminance and make it kind of pop out from the background. The other is actually to take the luminance down and take the saturation down. And sometimes that'll actually give a nicer coloring to the skin. So here's as is, and then as I take the luminance down, maybe to around there, and then raise my highlights up. Hello, we might have to do an adjustment brush. So we're just selecting our subject. So we'll do a brush like this. And then we'll raise the highlights up. And the whites up. So here's before and here's after. Much nicer skin. At least I hope you think so. I think so. We're going to head into our next photo here because I think that's looking pretty darn good. Obviously, it's way out of focus and very, very soft. So we could try adding a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity. Hopefully not in a brush, so we're actually doing something. Texture, clarity, a little dehaze, drop the black slightly. And by slightly, I mean a lot. Okay, so here's before and here's after. Much better tones overall. Now it's still feeling not quite right, so I might go down to my HSL again, grab my yellows and take those because they're looking a little bit green, slightly towards a warmer orange, like that. And the greens, I'm going to do the same thing, only I'm going to desaturate them. Because overall, I don't really want any green in this image, so I can actually take the saturation out. It'll have better coloring to the photo overall. And then these blues in the background, this is no longer talking about skin tones, but I feel like if we made them pop a little bit, that would help the image overall. So there's before and there's after. Still, I could do a million other things to this photo, but for the sake of time, we'll keep going. Next shot. Zooming in. Okay, we have nice skin, but it doesn't have the same pop as this reference photo on the left. So I think the tone overall is good. Just need to add some pop, some texture. Obviously, it's very out of focus. So we'll start with that. We'll add some texture, a little bit of clarity, a little dehaze. We are getting closer. And then I'm going to just grab my brush here. And yes, we're not directly dealing with skin tones, but the thing is, the skin tone itself can be great, but if the other details aren't right, it'll still feel off. So hopefully you'll see what I mean as we fix some of these issues. I'm just going to take texture up, sharpness up. Like that. I'm going to create another new mask, another brush, try and sharpen these lips. Okay. So here's before and here's after. Miles and miles and miles better from where we started. Obviously, it looks maybe a little bit too clarity and sharpened and stuff like that, so we could dial that back a little bit. And then go into our tone curve to add a little more pop to the skin. So there's a couple ways you can add a little more pop, a little more zest to the skin. Obviously, we could try raising the highlights, lowering the shadows, just adding some contrast overall to the image. But sometimes what's better is you actually take the contrast down in this main panel, so you get things nice and flat and creamy. Then we're going to selectively add it back in the tone curve. So we'll add just a little bit of pop in the midtones and highlights. Take our whites down a little bit, and you can take your midtones up, just like that. So here's before, here's after. And here's our totally before, totally after. It's looking a little bit cold, so I'll warm it up ever so slightly. Good. Okay, so now we haven't really talked about one other tool you do have available for your skin tones. And because our skin is not perfectly kind of matchy all the way around here, maybe we'll take a look at that. But first, I'm noticing, if you look at her arms, very, very nice and magenta. Nice. They're just more magenta than her chin and her head up here, which looks much more yellow. Now that's going to be a combination of the fact that she's facing up, so probably some of the light is reflecting off these tree branches, all that green, and adding that onto her skin, especially on her face. But it's also partially probably because of her hair reflecting as well. Either way, we're going to counter it by cooling it down a little bit and then adding a little magenta. So what I'm doing is I'm just trying to make the skin very cohesive and just blend all the way through. Lost my words there. So here's before and here's after. See how we're making a much more consistent skin tone across the board? And now that I've cooled it down a little bit, hello, I'm actually going to go in there and make sure I extend it onto all of her hair or none of her hair. Good. And then I can warm up the entire image as well. So we'll take our overall white balance up a little bit like that. Before, after. So now it's much more even. We can take it one step further. Again, because her arms are still kind of a little darker and more magenta than the rest of the image. Grab a brush. And we can raise the highlights a little bit. Maybe take our magenta down a little and our white balance down a little until things match really nicely. Somewhere around there. Okay, overall, before, after. And you can tweak that to your heart's content, make it warmer, darker. I don't care. You do you. But we have improved, and that's the main thing. Now, the other portion of this that we haven't really used is the calibration panel. Now, if you're in the Lightroom CC version of Lightroom, or the mobile version, you're not going to have access to this panel, and that's okay. This is just like an extra one that sometimes you can use if you're in Classic. We can grab our shadow tint, play around with that. Grab our red tint, play around with that. And the reds is normally going to affect the skin more than anything else, so we could take our saturation down, maybe in the reds a little. I like to take the greens up this way, saturation. Sometimes you add saturation in one, take it away in another, get some interesting effects. Now, I do have a full video on how the calibration panel kind of works and how you can get a much more detailed understanding of it. You can check that out. I'll try and link to it here if I don't forget. But essentially, there's two ways of using it. One is to really correct the color in your image. So, for example, if you find overall your shadows are too green, like this photo, we've got some kind of like really greenish, brownish greens going on. Greenish, brownish greens, as opposed to the other type of greens. So we can counteract that a little bit by adding some magenta to our photo. And then we can take our green primary in this direction. And our blues maybe towards blue a little bit more. So don't watch our model for a second, just watch the background. See how now the greens are much more green as opposed to before where they were like more of a murky sort of color. So that's a different option that you have for adjusting things too, that you can play with. So here's before those adjustments and here's after. We've made the greens a little bit more natural in terms of being green, and the skin tone has been affected by that. Whether it's better or worse, you can decide. Okay, let's keep going. Good practice. This girl looks like she's auditioning for a movie in which she is a stern character. I was going to say a horror movie, but how would you like it if that was you in this photo? And I said, you look like you're just auditioning for a horror movie. So I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to say that I was thinking about saying it. She looks like a pretty fun person. Okay, so we're going to start by adjusting our white balance as per usual. And we've got our reference photo, so that's going to really help us dial things in nicely. Here's before. Here's after. It looks pretty similar. I've just brightened things up a little bit. Let's darken it. Before and after. Things are a little bit, just more magenta, a little bit possibly warmer. I don't know. You decide. And then we can go down here, raise our highlights maybe, drop the contrast, and add some pop in our tone curve again. Same kind of deal. And again, if the tone curve is intimidating to you, go ahead, watch my tone curve video, watch another tone curve video on the internet. It's definitely worth learning because there's a lot more nuanced adjustments you can make in the tone curve than just adding contrast or taking the highlights down in this main panel up here. And Lightroom actually treats it differently. So if you raise the highlights in the tone curve, it'll do a different thing than if you raise it in the main panel. Okay, so we're getting sort of close. This photo was taken indoors, which is why this light is definitely not going to be exactly the same as this one, which was taken outdoors. But I think overall, we could probably take a little saturation out of the oranges and then add some saturation to the entire image. So we're going to take the vibrant slider up, and that's going to adjust our other colors more than it's going to adjust our skin tones. So as I do this and take the vibrance up to 100, that compared to saturation to 100, very different result in the skin tones. So I'm going to take my vibrance up, just add some pop to the image overall. Here's before, here's after. So a little magenta, a little warmth, a little bit more color and pop to our image. And that's without really doing much else at all. So of course, then you could do your stylistic stuff, whether that's adding a little texture and some clarity or taking some clarity away. Sometimes that can be cool. Take the clarity down and dehaze up. That'll smooth out your skin. Now, another thing that I should probably show you is some really easy ways of making your skin feel really nice and soft and glowing and beautiful. First thing, you can grab a brush. You can literally just brush on the skin like this. Everywhere that doesn't have detail. And then my favorite, fastest way to do this is just to take the contrast down a little bit, and then texture, you can take that way down, clarity down a little bit, dehaze down just a bit. So here's before, and here's after. Just cleans things up nicely. We can add a little bit of pop, maybe by raising the whites and the highlights slightly. Of course, you should be selecting your mask when you do that, or it won't do much. Just like that. So that's one way to do it. However, I'm doing that with 500 photos. It can take a while. So you decide. Another quick way to do it will be to go to Create New Mask. Let's first delete this one. Create New Mask. We're going to go to Color Range. You can dab it onto our subject's skin. And you're going to see Lightroom has said, okay, everything that's a similar skin tone, here you go, Ryan. Which is great, Lightroom, but you've done a kind of crappy job in that it's selected everything in the photo. So we can take this refine mask and take it down until it's hopefully just selecting the face or colors that are very similar to the color I selected. Now, if it's not grabbing everything in terms of the skin tone, you can hit Shift on your keyboard. That'll bring up this little plus icon, and you can expand that mask onto other areas of the skin. And then again, refine it from there. So the mask isn't perfect. It's selecting other parts of the image, which isn't ideal, but in this particular photo, none of those are going to be super important if I make them softer and kind of take the detail down. So what I can do now is kind of the same thing. I'm going to take our contrast down. That'll add some nice glow just by itself and even things out. Take the texture down, clarity down, dehaze down. And just like that, we smoothed out the skin very, very nicely, pretty quickly, and a lot more accurately than trying to do it with a brush. There's before, after, and here's before, just so you can compare. Now, obviously, you dial it in as necessary, so maybe we wouldn't want to take it down quite so much. We still want the skin to have some texture to it. It's just that can be a really quick trick for smoothing out skin, especially if you're working with a subject who doesn't have really beautiful, perfect skin at the time of the shoot. Okay, let's move on. We got a few more photos to practice on, and then we're done. So let me just say, if this video has been helpful, can you do me a favor, hit that like button and leave me a comment just so I know and can make more videos like this. Rather than stuff that's not helpful for you, I'd rather create things that actually are helpful for you. Okay, so white balance, really quickly and simply, we can adjust and make our skin better. Next step is going to be coming down here to our saturation, luminance, and hue. I'm going to take the saturation, we'll leave that for now. We're going to take our oranges over towards magenta a little bit, our yellows over towards orange quite a bit. Our reds, if we compare the lips, the reds are not even that red, so I can maybe take that towards magenta as well. And then overall, the skin could just be a lot darker. I think that would help. Obviously, this was taken with some really harsh light, so if we take the luminance down a little bit, we might get some nice results. Right? See how as I grab the luminance down, I'm not adding saturation to the lips, but they're naturally just going to be more color. So we can do that. A little trick for you. Okay, so here's before and here's after. We're definitely much, much better. There's a few other things we can do, so let's do them now. First off, I might add a little saturation to our skin, just a little bit. And then desaturate the reds just a bit, somewhere like that. Now I'm going to hit K on my keyboard, or just hit this little thing, add an adjustment brush. And I'm going to brush on these really, really harsh spots on her face. We're going to try and tone those down. So any area that's really, really bright or clipped, we're going to try and fix that. So we're going to take our contrast down in those areas. Texture down, clarity down. Now, I found in Lightroom in general, you're going to get better results by doing a little bit at a time rather than trying to get it all done with one brush and being super extreme. So I'm going to try and take things back a little bit, but not totally fix the problem. So here's before and here's after. It's not perfect, but if we add another brush, we'll get one step closer. So I'm going to do the same thing, add another brush. And this time I'm going to try and add a little bit of color. Now this might not work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So what I'm going to do, hit this little color panel, and I'm actually going to click and drag onto my reference photo. And as I do that, you're going to see that it's going to select whatever color I'm hovering on the photo. So that can be helpful. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't work so well. You can also grab a different color somewhere else on the skin of your subject. So let's go with, say, her forehead color. just like that. And then we can take our saturation down, so all we're adding is that color. Take the saturation of our color up, like that, and then just play around until you get the right shade. Somewhere around there is probably right. And take your saturation back up a little bit. Okay. Take highlights back. We're going to try and take the contrast down. And again, we're just repeating the process overall. Take our texture down a little bit, clarity down. Hit O if you ever want to see your mask and just sort of refine it. Okay, so here's before and here's after. So again, it's not perfect, but it's better. So you can continue down that route and eventually you're going to get something you're happy with. I don't want to get rid of all the highlights. Particularly what I'm trying to do is just get rid of kind of this textured, dotty, white sparkles that aren't super flattering. So what we can do here is zoom in so we can really see what we're doing. You could use your eraser brush to get rid of some of these larger blemishes. We're going to set it to heal instead of clone, and Lightroom will do its best to figure out what that texture should have been. And we could even play around and try and do that with some of these really harsh spots too. And it's just a matter of being patient, figuring it out. That's the thing, when it comes to skin tones and just editing inside of Lightroom, it's about patience and making tiny little improvements. 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%, a little bit here, a little bit there, and all of a sudden you've really improved the photo overall. So here's before and here's after. If you can't see that difference, keep practicing. Eventually you will. Now we're going to do that same technique as before. I wish I could grow. 5'7", man. Never changed. Okay, let's go over to color range. Same thing. We're going to dab like that. And we've selected our model. Nice. And this mask actually looks good to me. That's perfect just as is. Do the same thing as we did before. So our contrast down, texture down, clarity down, dehaze down. Something like that. Sharpness down a little bit. You can see that skin looks so much better than it did beforehand. Here's before and after. And then lastly, of course, sometimes simply the contrast of sharp next to not so sharp can make the not so sharp seem even dreamier and creamier. So what I mean is we're going to grab the areas of the image that should be really sharp. So the eyelashes, the eyes, tip of the nose, lips, that kind of thing. Take our texture up, clarity up, dehaze up, sharpness up. So here's before, here's after. Also, we could take our highlights up a little bit in those areas. Okay. So if we see our before and our after, we've made some massive improvements in this image overall. Now, of course, just for stylistic stuff, we could do all sorts of other things, but this is a skin tone tutorial. However, since it's just kind of fun, and I like having fun, we're going to select the subject with the subject auto mask. I'm going to hit the apostrophe key on our keyboard. That's going to select the background. Now I can blow out the background maybe. Let's see how that looks. Texture down, clarity down, dehaze down, make it really creamy. Something like that. Or I could go the other way, take the background down in opacity, in brightness, and maybe add some saturation for some pop, or you could do the total opposite and desaturate it. A million different options. World is your oyster. I'm going to go a little bit brighter, a little bit more airy. Like that. Then I'm going to just raise the highlights a little bit on our photo. And something like that. Perfect. Okay, we got 4 more. We're going to blast through these. We're going to zoom in. Her skin is pretty darn beautiful as is. Now, of course, the thing you want to go for when it comes to touching up portraits, touching up skin tones, is just consistency. So if you look at her skin, it's a little bit warmer over here. Her knee obviously is darker. Then we've got some different bruises and some different blemishes that we could fix. And that's what we would spend our time on if I were adjusting this image in depth. So to start with, let's go ahead and just do our overall color range trick. Create new mask, color range, select a skin tone point. Lightroom's going to say, hey, do you want this? You're going to say, no, you suck, Lightroom. Take your refine mask down all the way so it's not grabbing everything. And then hold down Shift to get a couple more spots on your subject and hopefully get a mask that's going to save you some time. Okay, not ideal because it's also grabbing this bralette and whatever else that thing is called. So what we can do here is go to Subtract, Brush, and just erase our mask off the areas we do not want masked. So our brush can grab this bralette thingy, and then we can also do the same thing on the outside areas of the image. So this sunset kind of thing. Okay, so let's say we've got our mask kind of where we want it. Same thing, texture down, dehaze down, contrast down, sharpness down. And somewhere along the line I took something too far because it looks a little weird. There. Then take our highlights up a little bit. That'll make the skin pop nicely. We could even add maybe a touch of saturation. Like that. So here's before and after. Let's try this again. Before, after. Now sometimes that trick's not going to help you too much. Oh, Lightroom totally froze. Hello. Because you can see we've got some weird banding going on as a result of that mask. So you just need to watch. Sometimes that trick works. Sometimes it's better off to do it naturally or to use a different auto mask tool. So we could go up here, do our masks again, go select subject. And then instead of just desaturating or detexturizing or declarifying the entire subject, we can go up here to the subtract. Hello. Go to our brush and do the same thing. Just subtract the areas that we want to maintain our detail. So this bra thingy, our flower headband, and our hair. And you don't have to be too careful about this because all you're really doing is taking away detail in the mask. You're not going to be super extreme. So it's not going to be super noticeable if your mask isn't perfect. Okay, so just the areas you want to stay sharp and textured, make sure to select those like that. Good. Undo your super weird, bizarre adjustments. And then we can take our texture down, clarity down, contrast down a bit. Highlights up, a little bit of saturation. Something like that. Before, after. Okay, and then we'll just go in and the other areas of the skin that is not perfect, we can zoom in, grab our little Band-Aid icon. Now with legs, I feel like on the face you want to have pores. That's important. On the legs, you can actually smooth these out quite a bit more and get away with it. So that's what we're going to try and do here. Okay, let's say I went through and I grabbed all of those spots. This one's really sloppy. We'll delete that. Next, I'm just going to grab a brush, hit K on my keyboard instead of Lightroom Classic, or go up to Create New Mask. Just select the legs. And because there's no other detail around here in this image, I don't have to be super careful about it. And do the same thing as before. Just take our clarity and our texture down. Clarity up, maybe texture all the way down. That'll maintain these harsher lines and make sure her legs still appear to be nice and sharp on the edges. Okay, and then we zoom in. You can see things feel a lot better. Obviously, my mask is kind of sloppy, so you should make sure you do a better job than me. Hello. Like so. Okay. So, keep it going. This one, obviously, is our reference. We'll keep going. This one. Be aware that subjects standing under trees in a grassy park, all that light is reflecting off of everything in your scene. So the sun is hitting the tree is green and reflecting greenish light onto your subject, which is why if you look in the subject's shadow areas, so under her chin, whatever, these areas are really green. That's from that reflected light. Because there's no direct light on her, only reflected light coming up from the grass, the trees, whatever. So let's start out with our white balance. Very good, very good. And from there, you can actually go down to your hue and saturation. Even target the greens sometimes can be nice. So we'll take our greens and warm them up a little bit. yellows, we'll take those towards more of a magenta and desaturate them slightly. And same with the greens. Okay. The blue in this image, I think I could actually desaturate it all the way and maybe even take our luminance up in the blues. It's not really adding to the image, it's just adding some extra color that isn't matching the rest of the scene. And then our skin tones themselves look not too bad. We can maybe take our oranges towards magenta slightly and either add a little bit of saturation or try lowering the luminance. So if we lower the luminance just a bit like that, and then add a bit more pop in our tone curve. How do you like that? Before, after. Okay. Now, whether or not you like the rest of the image, that's going to take some extra editing. Figure that out on your own. But hopefully you see the benefit. And of course, we could go in here with our classic color range trick or with our select subject. And you're going to grab your mask, go to subtract, brush, and subtract everything that is not meant to be selected. Not super fast, not super quick, but it is going to be a really nice, accurate mask for you in terms of the edges of this image of our subject. Good, 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 good. And then my go-to, just take texture, clarity down, dehaze down a little bit. Contrast, I find really is just an easy way of brightening the skin and also just overall making the skin a little bit softer. And you can add a little bit of pop with your whites. Like so. Uno, dos. And then I think our background, we could maybe add a little bit of pop. So we'll go select subject again. Hit the apostrophe key on your keyboard. That'll invert it. And we can take our background down in terms of exposure, up in terms of saturation. Maybe texture down a little bit, clarity down a little bit, and dehaze down a little bit. Before, après. Cool, cool, cool. All right, lastly, again, this is an example of greens really reflecting all over the place, which is why her skin, particularly the shadows where no natural direct light is hitting, is very, very green tinged. So let's start by just dialing in what we can with our white balance. So we'll cool it down, add some magenta, and add some exposure. Those three tools, once you dial those in and really become a master of them, are going to make a massive difference in your photography. Honestly, the best photography tool you could master, best trick you could learn is to really get good at white balance and seeing what things should look like and being able to dial that in. Okay, so we've gone from here to here. Definitely an improvement already. Now let's deal with all of these shadow areas which are still quite green. We're going to go down to our HSL panel, go to our yellows, try taking those towards magenta. So here's before, after, before, after. So I'm going to take it all the way. Because in this photo, I think that works. It's looking fine. Zoom in a little bit more. Come on. You got this, Ryan. You can do it. Take your saturation down in the yellows a little. And then maybe the luminance down in the oranges, just to add some more color to her skin overall. So you can see here's before and here's after. Her skin just appears to have more color, even though all we've done is made it darker. And then to raise it back up, we go to our tone curve, raise our midtones up because that's where her skin is living, and then take the shadows down a little bit to add some punch. So here's before, here's after, just like that. Voila, uno, dos, uno, dos. Maybe I went a little bit cold, we could warm it up. And then the rest is just gravy. What do you want to do? Do you want to desaturate the yellows and the greens? Maybe raise the luminance of the greens and the blues, go for more of a pastel feel. Even take that towards aqua. Let's go nuts. And then you can go down to your calibration panel. Easy way to get that teal and orange look. Take your hue of the blues down in terms of your blue channel. Take your greens this way. And then just balance out the reds because now the skin tones look too red. So we could try taking it this way, like that. Go back to our HSL. Kind of increase the luminosity of those channels. And it's not like I know exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of playing around, feeling what looks good and works good based on my hunches. So before, after. Kind of different. And of course, there's a million other things you could do. If the skin is still too orange, then we know or too red, we go back to our hue. Take our skin this way till we're happy. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like I do. Okay. So now that I'm singing songs, going a little bit crazy by myself, it's clearly time to be done. I hope this video has been helpful in some way, shape, or form. If it was, can you do me a big favor? Hit that like button and leave a comment below. Really, really helps me out. And if you want to pay it forward to all the other awesome photographers who are uploading photos like these so you can practice yourself, go ahead to signatureedits.com/free-raw-photos. You can upload a couple of your own favorite images, maybe get featured here on the channel, and make sure to tag them if their name is in the file name here. Otherwise, tag @signatureeditsco so I can see your awesome work. All right, bit of a long one. Hopefully it was helpful. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, create something awesome. Peace.